Television is supposed to last forever. Reruns keep the laughs alive. Streaming makes every drama immortal. And whole generations grow up watching the same shows their parents once loved. But not every episode survives. Some flickered on screen just once before being erased. Too offensive, too disturbing, or too dangerous to air again. And yet, here's the irony. The shows networks tried hardest to bury are the ones nobody forgets. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you probably remember a headline, a rumor, or a grainy VHS tape that proved you didn't imagine what you saw. Those lost episodes became legends, whispered about for decades. Tonight, we're rewinding through television's forbidden vault. 7 shows banned after a single airing. Some were accidents, others were scandals. All of them became unforgettable. And we start with a cartoon famous for mocking everything: politics, religion, even death, until it crossed into a subject so radioactive that not even Family Guy could get away with it. Number 7, Family Guy, Partial Terms of Endearment, 2010. Family Guy built its empire on mocking the untouchable. For over a decade, Seth MacFarlane's animated chaos machine went after religion, death, politics, and just about every sacred cow on American television. To many fans, the joke was that nothing was off limits. But in 2010, Fox finally found a subject they would not allow on the air. Partial Terms of Endearment began innocently enough. Lois Griffin is asked by a friend to be a surrogate, but the story doesn't stay lighthearted for long. It slides into one of America's most radioactive debates: abortion. Unlike a cutaway gag or a quick punchline, this episode was 30 straight minutes built entirely around a cultural wound that divides the nation. The episode was written, recorded, and fully animated. A complete half hour, ready for broadcast. But when executives screened it, the room froze. Advertisers would walk. Religious groups would erupt. Politicians already circling the show would pounce. For Fox, airing it meant war on multiple fronts. And yet, Seth MacFarlane held his ground. He argued the story had to include Ripley's sorry, wrong character. He argued the show couldn't exist without its willingness to push boundaries. But this time, the network refused to budge. The verdict was final. The episode would never air on television. For years, fans doubted it even existed. Rumors spread online about a lost Family Guy abortion episode. Then, like contraband, it slipped quietly onto DVD. Bootlegs began circulating. Forums lit up with debates. Was it satire? Was it provocation? Or just shock for the sake of shock? Ironically, the silence surrounding it gave the story more power than any primetime broadcast ever could. Critics noted that it wasn't even the show's most offensive half hour, but it was the one Fox felt could ignite real-world consequences. That decision turned it into legend. Today, #@Meta, pause, Erkims, of Endearment is remembered not for its punchlines, but for the fact it was buried. Proof that sometimes the episode you're not allowed to see becomes more famous than the ones you are. And if that sounds extreme, remember this was just a cartoon. What happened next was far more terrifying. A single episode of Pokémon aired in Japan and ended with children rushed to hospitals, flashing lights burned into their eyes. Number 6, Pokémon, Electric Soldier Porygon, 1997. Pokémon was supposed to be harmless. Bright colors, catchy music, simple battles that fueled a global craze. For kids in the late 90s, it was more than a show, it was a phenomenon. Trading cards, video games, toys. Pikachu was everywhere. But on December 16, 1997, Pokémon delivered an episode that turned that joy into panic. The story itself wasn't unusual. Ash, Misty, and Brock are transported into cyberspace by a digital Pokémon called Porygon. The adventure played like countless other episodes, until the climax. Team Rocket launches a cyber missile. Pikachu counters with a thunderbolt, and then it happened. The screen exploded with rapid red and blue strobe effects. For children watching across Japan, the result was immediate and terrifying. More than 600 kids experienced seizures, nausea, headaches, or fainting. Ambulances flooded Tokyo. News stations interrupted programming. Suddenly, the most beloved children's show in the world had become a national medical emergency. The incident was so shocking it earned its own term, Pokémon Shock. The government investigated. The episode was banned from ever airing again. And Porygon, ironically not the cause of the flashing lights, was quietly blacklisted from the franchise. To this day, one of the original 151 Pokémon has never appeared in the anime again. Pikachu remained the mascot, but Porygon was treated like a curse. Internationally, the story spread like wildfire. For many kids outside Japan, it became a legend whispered on playgrounds. Did you hear about the Pokémon episode that sent kids to the hospital? VHS bootlegs circulated. Clips resurfaced online, often with warnings not to watch too long. The episode itself became more famous for being banned than it ever could have been for its plot. And the irony? The flashing animation technique wasn't unique to Pokémon. Other anime had used it before. @ Meta, pause, sex, 0.05. But Pokémon's global popularity meant its mistake reached millions instead of thousands. What should have been forgotten as just another filler adventure is now remembered as one of the strangest, scariest nights in television history. If Family Guy proved a cartoon could be silenced for being too controversial, Pokémon showed how animation could literally hurt its audience. Number 5. Tiny Toon Adventures. One Beer, 1991. On the surface, Tiny Toon Adventures was one of the safest shows you could imagine. Produced by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, it was a kid-friendly spin on the classic Looney Tunes formula. Buster Bunny, Babs Bunny, Plucky Duck. They were designed to be a new generation's Bugs, Daffy, and Porky. Bright colors, slapstick gags, and endless Saturday morning fun. But then came one episode that shocked parents, networks, and even some of its creators. It was called One Beer. The premise sounded like a PSA, teach kids the dangers of alcohol. But the way the writers went about it was anything but typical. In the episode, Buster, Plucky, and Hampton find a single bottle of beer and decide to drink it for science. At first it plays like a parody, with exaggerated burps, slurred speech, and chaotic antics. But as the short goes on, the tone shifts from goofy to disturbing. The trio become intoxicated, singing a dark parody of a drinking song as they stumble through the town. Then, in a finale that stunned everyone, they steal a police car, drive recklessly through the streets, and plunge off a cliff to their apparent deaths. The car explodes. Fade to black. For a children's cartoon, it was unthinkable. Even though the episode ended with a narrator scolding the characters and insisting it was all just a joke, the imagery of beloved kid characters crashing to their deaths over alcohol crossed a line. When it first aired, the backlash was instant. Parents complained, affiliates pulled reruns, and Warner Brothers ordered the short buried. One Beer was never shown again in syndication. For decades, it existed only in rumor and rare VHS recordings, whispered about by fans who swore they'd seen the Tiny Toons drink themselves into oblivion. In the DVD era, the short resurfaced in some collections, usually with disclaimers attached. Even then, many fans were stunned at how dark and unsettling it felt compared to the rest of the series. And that's what made it unforgettable. By trying to parody the dangers of alcohol, Tiny Toons accidentally created one of the most infamous lost episodes in cartoon history. A 3-minute gag became a cautionary tale not about drinking, but about how far a children's show could go before it broke its own rules. If Pokémon showed how a cartoon could cause real-world harm, Tiny Toons proved that even good intentions could backfire spectacularly. But in the early 90s, another cartoon went too far in a very different way, turning fire into comedy and sparking a controversy that burned its way off the air. Number 4. Beavis and Butt-Head, Fire, 1993. In the early 90s, MTV wasn't just about music videos anymore. It was experimenting with edgy animation. And no show was more controversial than Beavis and Butt-Head. Two teenage slackers who sat on a couch, made crude jokes, and occasionally stumbled into bizarre adventures. To fans, they were hilarious. To parents, they were a nightmare. And nothing proved that divide more than the infamous Fire episode. The setup was simple. Beavis and Butthead, left unsupervised as always, start playing with matches. What begins as a dumb gag escalates into reckless chaos. At one point, Beavis shouts his soon-to-be infamous catchphrase, "Fire! Fire!" The joke was supposed to be absurd, another example of his brainless obsession with destruction. But when the episode aired, life outside the screen took a terrifying turn. Not long after, a tragic incident made national headlines. A 5-year-old boy in Ohio set fire to his family's trailer home, and his 2-year-old sister was killed. The mother claimed he had been influenced by watching Beavis and Butthead, specifically Beavis's obsession with fire. The media seized on the connection. Politicians condemned MTV. Parent groups demanded the show be pulled entirely. MTV panicked. The network immediately banned the fire episode and yanked reruns from prime time, moving the show to late-night slots. For years, any mention of fire was cut from reruns. Even Beavis's trademark chant, "Fire, fire," was censored. To this day, the original episode remains locked away, never officially re-aired. The irony? Beavis and Butthead were already a lightning rod for criticism. Teachers and parents blamed them for bad grades, juvenile behavior, and general stupidity. But the fire incident cemented their reputation as public enemy number one. The show continued, even thriving, but always under the shadow of that controversy. And yet, for fans, the ban only made the episode more legendary. Meta, pause, Sex 0.05, bootleg copies circulated. Kids whispered about the Lost Fire episode as if it were forbidden treasure. In trying to erase it, MTV had guaranteed it would never be forgotten. Looking back now, it's a strange snapshot of 90s culture. A cartoon meant as satire blamed for real-life tragedy. Whether fair or not, it showed how fragile the line was between comedy and catastrophe. If Tiny Toons was a children's show that went too dark, and Beavis and Butthead was a satire blamed for going too far, then our next entry took things in an entirely different direction. A beloved primetime juggernaut starring one of pop music's biggest icons. An episode so controversial that it was erased from television history. Number 3, The Simpsons, Stark Raving Dad, 1991. By 1991, The Simpsons wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural earthquake. Bart's catchphrases were on t-shirts. Homer's bumbling rage echoed in living rooms everywhere, and Fox had found its crown jewel. But in season 3, the show aired an episode that would eventually become one of its most infamous. Not because of what happened in the story, but because of who was in it. The premise was classic Simpsons absurdity. Homer gets mistakenly committed to a mental institution after wearing a pink shirt to work. Inside, he meets a gentle giant who claims to be Michael Jackson. The twist? That voice really was Michael Jackson. Uncredited, but unmistakable. For fans at the time, it felt like a coup. The biggest pop star in the world lending his voice to the edgiest cartoon on TV. The episode became an instant classic. Viewers loved the bizarre pairing of Homer and Michael. The final scene, where Jackson's character helps Bart write a heartfelt birthday song for Lisa, even became one of the show's most beloved musical moments. For nearly 2 decades, Stark Raving Dad was replayed countless times, a quirky reminder of how big The Simpsons had become. But then everything changed. In the 2010s, renewed allegations of child abuse against Michael Jackson reignited public debate. In 2019, following the controversial documentary Leaving Neverland, the show's producers made a decision. Stark Raving Dad would be pulled from circulation entirely. It was scrubbed from reruns, streaming platforms, and even future DVD box sets. Matt Groening himself called it the hardest creative decision we've ever made. The removal sparked fierce arguments. Some believed erasing the episode was necessary. Others argued it was rewriting history, punishing the work of an entire creative team for the sins of one man. Either way, a Simpsons classic was now a ghost known, remembered but officially gone. Today, Stark Raving Dad exists in a strange limbo. #@Meta, Farshid, pauses, Sex 0.05. It's still discussed, still debated, still uploaded in grainy clips online. But in the official record, it's as if it never happened. And that's what makes it unforgettable. The most famous guest star in Simpsons history is now the reason one of its most beloved episodes has vanished. If Beavis and Butthead showed how a cartoon could be blamed for tragedy, The Simpsons proved that even the most successful show on Earth could erase itself to survive. But our next entry didn't involve a cartoon at all. It was a live-action sitcom so shocking in concept that it was canceled almost instantly after just one episode. Number 2. Heil Honey, I'm Home, 1990. Some ideas are doomed from the start. Others are so outrageous you wonder how they ever made it past the first pitch. And then there's Heil Honey, I'm Home, a sitcom so shocking in concept that it was canceled after airing just a single episode. The year was 1990. Television comedy was in the middle of an identity crisis. In America, Seinfeld was redefining what sitcoms could be. In the UK, edgy humor like Blackadder and The Young Ones had already pushed boundaries with political satire and surreal gags. Channel 4 and Sky were both experimenting with controversial comedy formats. But nobody was ready for what one producer thought would be a bold parody of 1950s sitcoms. The premise? A black and white style family comedy modeled on I Love Lucy. The twist? The main characters were Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, living in a cozy apartment, trying to get along with their Jewish neighbors, Arnie and Rosa Goldenstein. Yes, you heard that right, a laugh-track sitcom starring Hitler. From the very first moments, viewers knew something was wrong. The theme song had Hitler entering the apartment with a booming, "Honey, I'm home!" laugh track roaring in the background. Jokes revolved around Ava's nagging, Adolf's temper, and the wacky antics of the Goldensteins next door. It wasn't clever satire. It wasn't biting political commentary. It played like a cheesy American sitcom, except the lead character was one of history's most infamous mass murderers. The backlash was immediate. Critics slammed it as tasteless. The Jewish Chronicle called it a new low in television. Even comedy writers who had thrived on pushing boundaries distanced themselves. Sky Television, which had hoped the show might be edgy enough to stand out, panicked. After the first episode aired, the series was yanked off the schedule entirely. The remaining 7 episodes were never broadcast. The bizarre part? The creators insisted it was meant as satire. They argued it was parodying how television sanitizes everything, even history's darkest figures. But if that was the goal, the execution failed spectacularly. Viewers weren't laughing at Hitler. They were just watching Hitler in a sitcom. The satire was lost in the absurdity. In the years that followed, Heil Honey, I'm Home became a legend of television failure. It often tops lists of worst shows ever made. For decades, the only surviving episode circulated as a grainy VHS rip, passed around by collectors and bootleggers. In the internet era, it resurfaced on YouTube, where millions have watched in morbid curiosity. Looking back, the show has become a case study in how comedy can go wrong. Context matters, timing matters, and above all, the subject matter matters. Trying to turn Hitler into a sitcom husband wasn't edgy satire. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And yet, the show's legacy endures precisely because it was so outrageous. In a way, Heil Honey, I'm Home achieved a strange immortality. Nobody remembers the dozens of forgettable sitcoms that premiered in 1990, but everyone remembers the one that dared to put Adolf Hitler in front of a studio audience. It's a reminder that television history isn't just about the hits, it's about the spectacular failures that reveal where the line is drawn. And sometimes, crossing that line makes a show more famous than any safe, successful program could ever be. If The Simpsons proved even the biggest juggernaut could erase itself, Heil Honey, I'm Home showed what happens when you never should have aired in the first place. But while this sitcom collapsed in shame, our number 1 entry is a very different story, an episode so grotesque and disturbing that even one of America's most fearless shows had to bury it. Number 1. The X-Files. Home, 1996. By the mid-1990s, The X-Files had already become a cultural phenomenon. Mulder and Scully were household names. UFO paranoia was back in fashion, and Fox had a show that blended science fiction, horror, and conspiracy into something irresistible. Fans tuned in every week expecting to be scared, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for an episode so disturbing that Fox banned it after its first airing. It was simply titled Home. On the surface, the story followed Mulder and Scully investigating the murder of an infant in a small Pennsylvania town. But from the very first minutes, it was clear this wasn't a typical monster of the week. The killers weren't aliens, mutants, or shadowy conspirators. They were something far more unsettling, an inbred family living in isolation on a decaying farm. The Peacock family. The Peacocks were grotesque, deformed, and terrifyingly human. They lived in filth, survived off the land, and protected their secrets with shocking brutality. One of those secrets was the source of the murdered infant, an incestuous relationship that kept their bloodline pure. When Mulder and Scully began digging deeper, the Peacocks responded with violence, leading to one of the most harrowing sequences in television history. A nighttime ambush set to the cheerful strains of Johnny Mathis's Wonderful, Wonderful. The contrast was unbearable. A happy love song played while the Peacocks slaughtered a sheriff and his wife in their own home. It was brutal, visceral, and so tonally jarring that many viewers turned away in horror. And then came the most infamous image of all, the Peacock mother. Limbless, grotesque, and hidden under a bed, she was kept alive by her sons, who used her as both parent and partner. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't science fiction. It was a nightmare rooted in human depravity. When Home aired on October 11, 1996, the reaction was immediate. Viewers flooded Fox with complaints. Hashtag, at Meta, hashtag, sex, 0.05. Critics described it as one of the most disturbing hours ever broadcast on network television. The network panicked. Executives declared the episode would never air again. For years, Home was left out of reruns, skipped in syndication, and effectively erased from official rotation. But just like every entry on this list, the attempt to bury it only made it more powerful. Fans whispered about the banned X-Files episode. Bootlegs circulated. When DVD box sets finally arrived, Home became a must-watch curiosity. And as the legend grew, so did its reputation. Today, it's often ranked among the greatest and most horrifying episodes of television ever made. What made it so unforgettable wasn't just the shock value. It was the way Home stripped away the supernatural safety net. Aliens and monsters are scary, yes, but the idea that real human beings could descend into such darkness, that was far worse. It blurred the line between horror fiction and reality in a way that still unsettles audiences decades later. The legacy of Home is undeniable. It proved that television could go further than anyone expected, but also showed the limits of what audiences were willing to accept. Even The X-Files, a show built on pushing boundaries, had found its wall. And that's why it earns the #1 spot. Not just because it was banned, but because it forced us to confront the most terrifying truth of all. The real monsters aren't aliens or creatures hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're human. So there you have it, 7 episodes that flickered once and then vanished. Family Guy's forbidden abortion storyline, Pokémon's flashing light disaster, the Tiny Toons drunk driving gag gone horribly wrong, Beavis and Butthead's obsession with fire, The Simpsons' most famous guest star erased from history, a British sitcom so tasteless it barely survived a single night, and finally, an X-Files story so disturbing it's still whispered about decades later. What ties them together isn't just that they were banned. It's that in being buried, they became immortal. The shows we weren't supposed to see are the ones we'll never forget. They live on in rumors, in grainy recordings, in the corners of pop culture memory. Proof that sometimes failure, outrage, or tragedy leaves a deeper mark than success ever could. Television was supposed to be safe. Instead, it created ghost episodes that will haunt screens forever, even if they're never broadcast again. Now we want to hear from you. Which of these episodes would you risk watching if it finally reappeared? Drop your pick in the comments below. And if you love diving into pop culture's hidden vault, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next trip back into TV's forbidden history.